the hidden engine of France. Picture the Eiffel Tower glittering under Parisian skies, tourists sipping coffee on the Champs-Élysées, the Louvre housing the treasures of civilization. France markets itself as the land of romance, culture, diplomacy, and elegance. But peel away the glamour, and a darker, more raw truth emerges. France's survival as a global power has never truly been built in Paris. It was built in Africa. Gold from Mali, uranium from Niger, oil from Gabon and Congo, cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire, coffee from Cameroon, cotton from Chad. The lifeblood of French prosperity flowed, and still flows, from the African continent. For over a century, Africa has been not just a partner, but a lifeline. Without Africa, France shrinks. Without Africa, France loses its power, its prestige, its very identity as a world player. This is the untold story of why Africa matters so much to France, and why the unraveling of France-Afrique could be the single greatest existential crisis for Paris since World War II. Colonial legacy equals economic lifeline. France's empire stretched across West and Central Africa, from Dakar to Brazzaville. But unlike Britain, which eventually pivoted its global power toward trade liberalization and the financial markets of London, France chose a different path. It embedded its economic arteries directly into Africa. After independence, Paris didn't walk away. Instead, it created a system now infamous as France-Afrique, a tangled web of trade deals, military treaties, currency control, and personal networks between French elites and African leaders. This was not partnership. This was dependency. By design, cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire fed France's chocolate industry. Cotton from Chad supported its textiles. Oil from Gabon powered its refineries. Uranium from Niger kept French nuclear plants alive. Every sector of France's wealth had African fingerprints on it. Even after flags changed and national anthems shifted, France's grip remained. The CFA franc, currency chains, perhaps the most brilliant and sinister creation of France-Afrique, is the CFA franc system. 14 African countries, covering over 150 million people, were locked into a currency pegged to the euro, with their reserves historically held in Paris. In effect, their economic sovereignty was surrendered. This allowed France to 1. Stabilize its banks with African reserves. 2. Secure cheap access to African raw materials. 3. Control African inflation and monetary policy from afar. The result: African economies remain tied, dependent, and unable to break free from Paris's shadow. For decades, this was barely discussed in mainstream Western media. But in Africa, it became the symbol of chains disguised as currency. Today, as Pan-African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and Abderrahmane Tiani openly denounce the CFA system, Paris feels the ground crumbling beneath its feet. Without this currency advantage, French banks and corporations face brutal adjustments. Energy and raw materials. Africa powers France. France loves to boast that it is a nuclear superpower, with over 70% of its electricity coming from nuclear plants. What it rarely admits is that the uranium that powers those reactors doesn't come from French soil. It comes from Niger. For decades, Niger supplied uranium at rates favorable to Paris. But as Niamey breaks free and demands sovereignty, France's energy lifeline is threatened. And it doesn't stop there. Oil from Gabon, Congo, and Chad flows into the refineries of Total Energies. Gold from Mali and Burkina Faso stabilizes France's trade balance. Cocoa and coffee keep French supermarkets stocked and exports profitable. If Africa turns off the tap, France quite literally struggles to keep the lights on. Paris may glow at night, but that glow is powered by African resources. Geopolitical power. Africa is France's global card. France is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It has disproportionate influence within the European Union. It is seen as a world power. But why? The hard truth: much of this prestige is built on France's image as the guardian of Africa. For decades, Paris positioned itself as Africa's gatekeeper to the world, managing crises, deploying troops, and projecting stability. This gave France leverage in global negotiations. But as African nations reject French troops and forge new alliances with Russia, China, and Turkey, Paris is losing its greatest card. Without Africa, France is reduced to competing with Germany, Italy, or Spain, a European middle power rather than a global shaper. Military presence. The bases of control. France's military map of Africa tells the story. Bases in Djibouti, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, Chad, and until recently, Niger and Mali. These bases weren't about partnership, they were about projection. They secured trade routes, guaranteed access to resources, and served as launch pads for interventions when African leaders stepped out of line. But in the 2020s, a wave of resistance swept across the Sahel. Mali expelled French troops in 2022. Burkina Faso followed in 2023. Niger shut the door in 2023-24. The once unshakable military presence is crumbling. France, for the first time in generations, is being forced to retreat. What happens if France loses Africa? Let us be clear. If Paris loses Africa, the consequences are catastrophic. 1. Economic decline, right arrow rising energy prices. Weaker Eurozone influence. Collapsing exports. 2. Strategic isolation, right arrow France can justify its great power status in NATO or the UN. 3. Domestic turmoil, right arrow French farmers, workers, and unions feel the squeeze. Protests erupt like the yellow vests, but far worse. 4. Rise of rivals, right arrow Russia, China, Turkey, and even India step in to replace France in Africa's markets. Paris risks irrelevance. This isn't paranoia. It's already happening. Every week, Moscow signs new defense deals. Beijing invests billions in infrastructure. Ankara builds schools, mosques, and trade networks. Africa is moving on, and France is struggling to keep up. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Help keep this channel going. The bottom line. France stripped naked. France without Africa is France stripped naked. For decades, the continent has been the oxygen tank keeping Paris alive in the 21st century. Without uranium, oil, gold, and trade leverage, France loses its shine. Without the CFA franc, it loses control. Without its bases, it loses power projection. The fight for Africa isn't about development aid or democracy. It's about survival. France's survival. But the tide is turning. From Bamako to Ouagadougou to Niamey, Africans are breaking the chains. Leaders are rejecting French interference. Populations are demanding sovereignty. And in this wave of Pan-African awakening, France faces an existential crisis, unlike anything it has seen since World War II.